Okay, now we look at the scope and nature of linguistics. So linguistics covers a wide area of topics and its boundaries are not exactly definable. Particularly today, the boundaries of linguistics have become very uncertain. It has become very wide. You talk about uh, forensic linguistics. So all kinds of maybe 100 different branches of linguistics can be there. When you uh, uh, investigate a case, an expert might be able to help in terms of deciphering the language that a person uses, that is spoken language, and maybe you'll need to identify somebody's handwriting. So there is a forensic application of linguistic knowledge, and so many psycholinguistics, computational linguistics, so many linguistics are there. Now let us look at this image. Look at different branches of linguistics which occur in the peripheral circle here, and the essential elements of linguistics which are encompassed in these inner circles. So maybe central would be phonetics, then phonology. We'll be looking at this in detail. So phonetics, then phonology, maybe these together will form one entity. So you have sounds at the center, and then you have syntax, you have semantics, you have pragmatics. In between, there is morphology, which maybe they have included within syntax. Morphology is important. So you have phonetics, phonology, morphology, syntax, semantics. Syntax is the order in which you arrange words. So whether I say I'm going home or going home I or home going I, that is syntax. From what I said, you might have felt that in English, syntax is fixed. So I always have to say I am going home. I cannot say going home I. Well, poetically, I might say that, but cow eats grass. When you change the order, it becomes eats grass cow or grass eats cow. So then the sense is lost. In English, that the syntax is very rigid, whereas in Malayalam, that is not so. Nyan pogunnu, nyan veetil pogunnu. Pogunnu nyan veetil. Veetil pogunnu nyan. Whichever way I say, the meaning is conveyed. That is because in Malayalam, the syntax is not rigid. Why is that? That is something we'll discuss a little later. Semantics is a study of meaning. Pragmatics is the study of how all these things work out in life. So all these things are components. We'll be looking at all these. This is basically in the next sessions, we'll be looking at phonetics, phonology, morphology, syntax, semantics, and pragmatics. And the peripheral circle, you have different divisions of linguistics. So linguistics, sociolinguistics, tells us how language works in a society. Perhaps it's the most important aspect or basic aspect of linguistics because language is the product of a society. Language cannot exist without at least one additional person, as I said. You do not sit alone and use language. You can do that. You can meditate using language. You can write something in language. You can read something in language. But actual use of language in speech, primarily that is what language is meant for, will not happen without at least one person. So language is the property of a society. And language within a society, language works in ways over which we have little control. That's what I was saying, that there will be different slangs, different dialectal variations, a lot of changes will keep happening to language when it works within a society. All those things are studied under sociolinguistics. We will do a bit of sociolinguistics in the course of the paper you are looking at. Then you have anthropological linguistics, philosophical linguistics, stylistics. Stylistics is applying linguistics in appreciating literary works. You have computational linguistics, which is related to artificial intelligence. Then you have applied linguistics. Well, applied, we teachers, I am, and you are preparing to be applied linguists. When you become teachers of English language, you are using applied linguistics. So then psycholinguistics, the relation between your brain and the way in which language develops in the brain, this is also very, very important branch and very complex and important. See, this philosophical linguistics, for example, helps philosophy more than it helps linguistics. But psycholinguistics helps language also. It gives us the language to talk about language. Psycholinguistics is a very crucial area. We will be looking at psycholinguistics also in the course of the paper. So these are the main divisions of linguistics. You have the divisions within the circles and the in the peripheral circles. So now we are going to look at the different aspects one by one quickly, but we'll be looking at in detail in the coming sessions. But we'll look at the different aspects, these as phonetics, phonology, morphology, syntax, etc. Phonetics is the study of human speech. And it is at the center because speech is the basic unit and sounds are the most basic units of speech. Phonetics, this is to be pronounced as phonetics. Phoneticians are concerned with the actual physical sounds, the raw material out of which language is made. Here, there's a reference to Pygmalion. Pygmalion is a play written by Bernard Shaw. It has been made into a very successful movie named My Fair Lady. It's worth watching. It's about phonetics. So Professor Higgins is a phonologist, a phonetician who he believes that language should be monolithic in the sense that that was a belief in those days. Bernard Shaw himself believed that language essentially has a standard form and there should be no deviation. So in this play, you have Professor Higgins, who is a phonetician, who finds a flower girl who speaks a very rude kind of English. So he finds that English despicable. There is in the movie, there is a song, speak, if I wonder whether I should take this woman out and hang her for the cold-blooded murder of the English tongue. That's a very conservative outlook towards language. The language, his language, the language of the elite in Britain, Higgins considers to be the proper one. And the English of Eliza Doolittle, which is Cockney, which is the English of uneducated people living in suburban London, is condemned by Professor Higgins. But the interesting thing is that the majority of the people in England at that time, or in London area at that time, spoke the language that Eliza spoke. So that takes us back to the statement we made a while ago that there is no standard language. Modern linguistics is interested in all varieties of language and considers all varieties with equal significance. So Pygmalion is a very amusing play to read. Maybe I've read it 7 to 8 times, not recently though. And the movie is also exquisitely taken and it's eminently enjoyable. So that the play should be read by every literature language student, and the movie should also be watched by every language and literature student. But again, you must watch it with the notion that it's a very conservative approach towards language learning. So that is phonetics. Phonetics again is phonetics is devoid of actual use. So I go about describing that these are the sounds of this language. I analyze, put them in little boxes. So I'm not worried about how these sounds come together and work in real life. I am only worried about those little languages. For example, in the movie, My Fair Lady, Eliza makes a long sound, ow kind of sound. And Professor Higgins counts and says there are about 120 vowels in her utterance. So he is interested in that. So look at the very prosaic interest that he has, which is again very amusing too. From a scholarly point of view, it's very amusing. But from the point of view of actual life, it need not be so amusing. Anyway, that is the interest of a phonetician. A phonetician is interested in the excellent production of a sound, explaining the quality of a sound, describing the sound, telling you how it is articulated. Well, but phonology goes one step further. You can say that phonetics is part of phonology. Phonology looks at how these sounds work in actual speech. So then when they are connected, there may be slight changes happening. So phonology describes all those changes. Then the next aspect is morphology, which is somehow not mentioned here. Morphology is the written form. So you have the written form, Example, you say riverside, and then you write it riverside. And the written thing will be very different from the spoken thing. So in the written form, the shape of the written word is morphology. So that's again a very important part of linguistics. So from morphology, we move to semantics. Semantics is the meaning part. So you make utterances, and unless somebody else understands, there is no point. So semantics is important. Semantics is what looks at the meaning conveyed. Then you have syntax. Syntax is the order in which the words are arranged. You have the morphology. Now we are going to look at the basic concepts of linguistics. So as we discussed before, language is an arbitrary system of articulated sounds made use of by human beings for communication. When a language is examined, its sounds, words, sentences, and meanings are studied. Though there are differences of opinion regarding the levels of language structure, the essentially agreed levels of analysis are phonological, morphological, syntactical, and semantical. So we are going to look briefly at what is phonology, what is morphology, what is syntax, and what is semantics. We will study each of these in detail later. So phonology is the organization of sounds into units called phonemes. So phoneme, a phone would be the most basic sound, and a phoneme is the basic meaningful sound that a human being makes. We generally say that a phoneme is the basic human sound. Phonology is a term. Sometimes phonology is used to embrace both phonetics and phonology. Phonology studies what is significant in a particular language as the basic meaningful elements which enter into larger patterns of construction. So phonetics is the study of how a sound is created, how all the sounds that human beings can produce, oral sounds, using pulmonary air, it is kind of studied. That is phonetics. It need not always be pulmonary air, air from the lungs. We use the air that flows out of the lungs to produce language, but in many languages in Africa, for example, people uses click sounds with their tongue without any air from the lungs. Also, people communicate using clicks with the tongue, and sometimes a sound is produced by taking the breath in, and the sound is produced at the throat. So things are possible in human speech, but basically it is the sound from that emanates from the lungs, through the throat, through the mouth, through the nose, and then you have speech. Yeah, that is phonology. Phonetics is the basic units of speech, and phonology studies how all these little units come together and become effective in conveying meaning. So phonetics studies are basic raw materials of speech. It does not concern with any particular language. But phonology of a language is the selection of the selection of the sounds in that language and how they operate when they come into combinations. That is phonology. Then morphology is that part of language which is considered with the study and analysis of the structure, form, and classes of words. So morphology is the study of written language, where the primary unit is word. If you look at this word morphology itself, you have morph as one part of it. You can say that the root part of the word is morph. Morph means essentially shape. So logos is there. Logos is the study of, so that is another word actually. It's another root word. Morpho or morph is shape and logos is knowledge. So this word has two roots in it. And yeah. So such kind of analysis you can, this is a word which is made of two morphs, I can say. And let me look at and look at another here. Organize is one part and shin is another part. The shin is a suffix, organization. So you have organization, you have organize, and then a shin. that there are two morphs are there. You can say that in this word there are two morphs. Here you have morpho and logi as two words. And here morphemes. Morpheme is one one morpheme, and S is another morpheme. Okay, so I hope you understood. But we'll look at this in detail later, so don't worry even if you do not understand. In discovery, again, it's very interesting. This is a morph, which is a suffix. Cover is a root word, is again a morph and morpheme, and you have ing as a suffix. So that is when you when you analyze the parts of a word. This is again another very interesting study, which will help you like language more, learn language more, and teach language better. Syntax is the order, the combination. Again, something that we discussed already, the combination of words into phrases, clauses, structures, sentences, etc. And then you have semantics. It deals with the study of meaning. So we said already several times that meaning in English is arbitrary. But semantics looks at this arbitrary way in which meaning is conveyed. It shows how new words are formed. It shows how the meaning changes from time to time. A word that had one meaning 100 years back today has another meaning. For example, we never had a word sanitize. We had and sanitizer. These words were there, but they were not part of everyday life. So we associated sanity with a condition of the brain, but or your psychological state. But now we talk a lot about sanitizing. And curiously, the meaning of sane, health. Sane is basically the meaning of sane is health. That is why it is called sanitary. Sanitary means healthy, and sanitize to make healthy. So we today have the meaning of sterilize or kill the germs, but sanity, sane essentially meant health. Later on, through a peculiar semantic change, I think euphemism was involved when people talk about the mental health. So sanity and sanatorium. Sanatorium was a place where you would go when you are not well. But today that word has come to have the meaning of a place where a mentally ill person is confined. So all these changes, every word has a story, and that opens a fascinating world if you look for it. Other words here, diachronic and synchronic. These are very interesting words. Diachronic study of language is the study of history of the language. So when I talked about how the Dravidian languages split up into modern South Indian languages, when I talked about the Indo-European family of languages, I was talking about diachronic linguistic study. That was diachronic linguistics, the history of the evolution of language. And that is diachronic. And when I say that Malayalam language has changed over the last 50 years, I'm making a diachronic report of it. If I'm looking at the kind of Malayalam spoken in the 80s, based on evidence in movies and other recordings, I will be making a synchronic study of the language. I'm looking at the language of a particular place at a particular period of time. So it can be today, it can be present, it can be some point of time in the past. Then it would be synchronic. Even if I'm studying the features of a language that as it existed 20 years or 100 years or 200 years back, it would be synchronic if I'm looking at it from at a particular point of time. But when I look at its evolution over time, it would be diachronic. And here there is micro and macro linguistics. Again, just be familiar with it. Micro linguistics, the sole concern is the structure of language without regard to the acquisitional, cultural, sociological, psychological aspects. So that is micro linguistics. You are focusing entirely on one aspect of the language. When you look at all the aspects, you take a broader view, it is macro linguistics. So for example, if you are studying Malayalam and you study only at the sounds that exist and the pronunciation of different words, etc., it would be micro linguistic study of Malayalam. If I look at this sound and its variant forms in different cultural scenes, in different people who have acquired Malayalam in the presence of another language, for example, in the border with Tamil Nadu, that particular sound may have a slight difference. All these things and the psychological condition of the learner and his physiological features, all things are taken into consideration. It would be macro linguistics. But Generally, we are more interested in this macro linguistic aspect. So because we learn language for communication, we learn language to be able to communicate efficiently in that particular language and be successful. Therefore, we are more interested in the macro linguistic aspect. But you also might need to have micro linguistic skills if you want to specialize in this area. And two other words here are comparative linguistics and contrastive linguistics. Just be familiar with all these words. Don't worry if you have forgotten one or two. It's not going to make any difference. Comparative linguistics, again, it's from the very word you will probably understand. It is comparing two or more languages, particularly in a diachronic manner. You're comparing two or more languages in a historic evolutionary kind of way. You are doing comparative linguistics. And if you are contrastivist, you are taking Malayalam and English vowel system and you are putting them side by side and drawing the differences. It is a synchronic comparative study, which is called contrastive linguistics. It's a contrast. You are looking at the contrast also. Even though there is comparison involved, there is more of a contrasting. It is comparison of two or more synchronic descriptions. Comparative linguistics is generally broad kind of comparison between two languages. Again, here one interesting thing is, even if I study English and Malayalam vowel system, it's also a comparative linguistic study. Though on a micro level, there is a contrastive matter involved. So Sir William Jones is mentioned here, a very important philologist. In those days, Sir William Jones, who was in India, was doing explorations, studying Sanskrit. He found many similarities between Sanskrit, Greek, Latin, Celtic, and Germanic languages. So from that came the idea of the Indo-European large family of languages. And that kind of comparison was called comparative philology. So that the word philology used to be the ancient word, or rather the olden word for linguistics. Today we use the word linguistics and not philology. Philo is love and logos is word. Philology would be love of words. So that is how that word came. If you look at synchronic, diachronic, etc., you can find this kind of etymological study. Chronos is time. So synchronic and